The transport ship Galactic Unity hummed through the void between star systems, carrying what many considered the most elite fighting force in known space. Representatives from 12 different species sat in the main assembly hall, their various forms creating a rainbow of alien physiology. The Krillian warriors towered at nearly 8 feet tall, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the artificial lights. The Vorthak soldiers moved with fluid grace, their tentacled arms constantly shifting positions as they cleaned their plasma rifles. The Zephyrian shock troops buzzed with nervous energy, their 4 arms checking and rechecking their equipment with mechanical precision. At the far end of the hall, almost forgotten in the shadows, sat a single human. Marcus Chun looked unremarkable compared to his alien counterparts. At 5 feet 10 inches, he was dwarfed by most of the other soldiers. His equipment appeared primitive next to their advanced weaponry. Where others carried plasma cannons and particle beam rifles, Marcus had only an old-fashioned projectile rifle slung across his back. The weapon looked ancient, with its wooden stock worn smooth from years of use. The other soldiers had been talking among themselves for hours, sharing war stories and boasting about their capabilities. The Krillians spoke of their ability to punch through steel with their bare claws. The Vorthak described battles where they had single-handedly held off entire enemy platoons. The Zephyrians detailed precision strikes that had taken out enemy commanders from impossible distances using their advanced targeting systems. "I heard Earth finally decided to contribute to this mission," rumbled Commander Thrax, a massive Krillian whose voice sounded like grinding stone. His 4 compound eyes fixed on Marcus with obvious disdain. "Though I cannot imagine what assistance a human could possibly provide." Several aliens turned to look at the human soldier. Marcus continued cleaning his rifle, apparently unbothered by the attention. His movements were methodical, practiced, showing years of experience with the weapon. "The humans have been in space for what? Barely 2 centuries," added Lieutenant Vex, a Vorthak whose purple skin shifted color slightly as he spoke. "Most of our civilizations have been waging interstellar war since before their species discovered fire. What could they possibly teach us about combat?" A ripple of what passed for laughter among the various species filled the transport. The Zephyrians created a chittering sound, while the Krillians produced a deep rumbling noise. Other species contributed their own versions of amusement. Captain Zoran, the mission commander and a member of the ancient Etherian race, studied the situation with his large, silver eyes. The Etherians had been spacefaring for over 10,000 years and had seen the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations. They were known throughout the galaxy for their wisdom and tactical brilliance. Zoran had specifically requested human representation on this mission, though he had not explained his reasoning to the other officers. "Perhaps we should hear what our human colleague has to contribute," Zoran said, his voice carrying the musical quality typical of his species. "Marcus Chun, is it not? Your service record indicates significant experience in what humans call asymmetric warfare." Marcus looked up from his rifle, meeting the captain's gaze with calm, dark eyes. "That's correct, sir. 15 years active duty, mostly in hostile territory where conventional tactics weren't effective." "Hostile territory," scoffed Sergeant Crix, a Manthari whose insectoid features made his expressions difficult to read. "You mean fighting other humans with primitive weapons? We are about to face the Void Swarm, creatures that have consumed entire star systems. They are not impressed by human bravado." The Void Swarm represented the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. They were a hive-minded species that appeared from the dark spaces between galaxies, consuming everything in their path. Their technology was beyond anything the galactic civilizations had encountered. Their ships could phase in and out of normal space, making them nearly impossible to target with conventional weapons. Their warriors were bioengineered killing machines, each one capable of taking on multiple trained soldiers. "I'm not here to impress anyone," Marcus replied quietly. "I'm here to do my job." This response drew more derisive sounds from the assembled soldiers. The Krillian commander's claws scraped against his armor as he gestured dismissively. "Your job? What job could you possibly perform that our advanced targeting systems cannot do better? Our plasma rifles can eliminate targets at distances your primitive projectile weapon cannot even reach. Our armor can withstand direct hits from energy weapons. Our soldiers have been genetically enhanced for combat efficiency. What advantage does your species possibly possess? Marcus considered the question for a long moment, his hands never stopping their methodical cleaning of his rifle. The weapon was a custom-built piece, designed for extreme long-range precision shooting. Every component had been carefully selected and calibrated. The scope alone was worth more than most soldiers' entire equipment loadout, though it looked simple compared to the holographic targeting systems used by the alien warriors. Humans have been killing each other for thousands of years, Marcus finally said. We've gotten very good at it. The statement hung in the air for a moment before the aliens burst into fresh laughter. The idea that primitive human warfare could compare to their advanced military techniques struck them as absurd. Thousands of years, repeated Thrax mockingly. My people have been perfecting the art of war for 50,000 years. We have conquered 17 different star systems through superior tactical thinking and overwhelming firepower. The Vorthak military academies have produced strategic masters for millennia, added Lieutenant Vex. Our battle doctrine has been refined through countless conflicts across hundreds of worlds. Marcus nodded politely. I'm sure they have, sir. But there's a difference between studying war and living it. Living it. Crix's antennae twitched with what might have been amusement. You speak as though we are academic theorists. Every soldier here has seen real combat against dangerous enemies. Have you ever had to take a shot knowing that if you missed, everyone you cared about would die? Marcus asked quietly. Have you ever had to lie motionless for 3 days straight, waiting for one perfect moment? Have you ever had to kill someone close enough to see their eyes? The transport fell silent. Several of the aliens exchanged glances, unsure how to respond to the humans' questions. War isn't just about superior firepower or advanced technology, Marcus continued, reassembling his rifle with smooth, practiced motions. Sometimes it comes down to one person, in one moment, making one perfect shot. That's what humans do. We make the shots that no one else can make. Captain Zoran watched this exchange with interest. His species had fought alongside humans during the border conflicts with the hegemony, and he had seen their capabilities firsthand. The other species had not yet learned what the Etherians had discovered about humanity. The mission briefings indicate that conventional assault tactics have failed against void swarm positions, Zoran observed. Their phase shift technology makes them nearly impossible to target with energy weapons. Perhaps a different approach is needed. What different approach could possibly work where plasma cannons have failed? Demanded Thrax. These creatures are protected by energy shields that deflect our most powerful weapons. Physical projectiles, Marcus said simply. Old-fashioned bullets. They can't phase shift matter that's already in normal space. The aliens stared at him in disbelief. The idea that primitive projectile weapons could succeed where their advanced technology had failed seemed ridiculous. Bullets. Vex's skin shifted to a deeper purple, indicating his incredulity. You suggest we fight an advanced alien menace with metal slugs fired from mechanical devices. It worked against the hegemony shock troops, Zoran noted quietly. Their personal shields were designed to stop energy weapons. They were completely ineffective against human sniper fire. This information was news to most of the soldiers present. The hegemony conflict had been contained to a small sector of space, and many details remained classified. One shot, one kill, Marcus said, running his hand along the length of his rifle barrel. It's what we do best. The aliens remained skeptical. Their weapons could fire dozens of plasma bolts per second with computer-guided accuracy. The idea that a single projectile fired by hand could be more effective seemed to contradict everything they understood about modern warfare. We shall see, rumbled Thrax. Though I suspect you will discover that real combat is quite different from whatever conflicts you have experienced on your primitive world. Marcus smiled slightly. I suspect you're right about that, sir. It will be quite different. The transport continued through space, carrying its cargo of warriors toward what would prove to be one of the most significant battles in galactic history. None of the alien soldiers could have imagined that their survival would depend on the skills of the quiet human with his ancient weapon. They had built their reputations on overwhelming firepower and advanced technology. They were about to learn that sometimes the old ways were the best ways, and that humanity's greatest strength lay not in their technology, but in their ability to make impossible shots when everything depended on it. 3 days later, the Galactic Unity dropped out of hyperspace near the contested world of Kepler, 442b. The planet hung before them like a wounded jewel, its surface scarred by the ongoing war with the Void Swarm. What had once been a thriving colonial world with crystal cities and floating gardens was now a battlefield of twisted metal and poisoned earth. The briefing room filled quickly as Captain Zoran called a mission meeting. Holographic displays showed the planet's surface, marked with red zones indicating Void Swarm positions. The aliens studied the tactical information with professional interest, their various species bringing different perspectives to the strategic challenge ahead. Intelligence indicates that the Void Swarm has established a primary hive cluster here. Zoran pointed to a mountainous region on the planet's northern continent. Previous assault teams have been unable to penetrate their defenses. The creature's phase shift capability makes conventional bombardment ineffective. Commander Thrax's claws clicked against the table's surface as he examined the data. How many assault teams have been lost? 17, Zoran replied grimly, including 3 full battalions of Krillian shock troops, 2 squadrons of Vorthack infiltration specialists, and an entire regiment of Zephyrian aerial combat units. The silence that followed this announcement was heavy with implication. These were the elite forces of their respective civilizations, soldiers who had never known defeat in conventional warfare. The Void Swarm warriors are unlike anything we have previously encountered, Zoran continued. They appear to be bioengineered specifically for combat, with rapid healing capabilities and natural weapons that can penetrate most known armor types. More significantly, they coordinate their movements with perfect precision, suggesting a hive mind intelligence directing their actions. Lieutenant Vex raised one of his tentacled arms. What about their command structure? Standard tactical doctrine suggests targeting leadership elements to disrupt coordination. That has proven impossible. Zoran's silver eyes dimmed with frustration. The hive mind appears to be distributed among all units. There are no individual leaders to eliminate. Furthermore, their phase shift technology allows them to simply disappear when targeted, only to reappear behind our lines. Marcus had been listening quietly, studying the holographic displays with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years reading battlefield terrain. Unlike the other soldiers, he was not focused on the enemy positions or their defensive capabilities. Instead, he was examining the geographical features, looking for sight lines and elevation advantages. What's the maximum effective range of their phase shift capability? He asked. The question surprised the aliens. They had been thinking in terms of assault tactics and overwhelming firepower, not the mechanics of enemy abilities. Approximately 2 kilometers, Zoran replied after checking his data files. Beyond that range, they appear to be locked into normal space. Marcus nodded, his dark eyes tracing lines across the holographic topography. And their detection capabilities? Unknown, Zoran admitted. None of our reconnaissance teams have survived long enough to gather detailed intelligence on their sensory systems. But they respond to direct attacks immediately, Sergeant Crix observed, suggesting sophisticated threat detection. Or they can simply feel the impact of energy weapons through their biomechanical nature, Marcus suggested. Physical trauma tends to be harder to ignore than energy discharge. The aliens exchanged glances. The humans' questions were following a line of reasoning they had not considered. Their military doctrine emphasized direct confrontation and overwhelming force projection. The idea of engaging from extreme range was not part of their tactical thinking. What exactly are you proposing? Thrax demanded, his massive form leaning forward aggressively. That we somehow attack from beyond their phase shift range? Our plasma weapons have reduced effectiveness at such distances, and targeting systems cannot maintain lock-on through atmospheric interference. Marcus smiled slightly. I'm proposing that we don't need energy weapons or targeting systems. Sometimes the old methods work better than the new ones. He activated his personal data pad, displaying specifications for his rifle. The aliens leaned forward to examine the information, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright disbelief. This is primitive projectile technology, Vex observed, his purple skin shifting to a darker hue that indicated skepticism. The ballistic calculations alone would be impossibly complex. How could you possibly hit a target at extreme range without computer assistance? Practice, Marcus replied simply. Lots and lots of practice. The mathematical variables are enormous, Crix protested, his antennae twitching rapidly. Wind speed, humidity, atmospheric pressure, target movement, gravitational effects, projectile drop over distance. No biological mind could process all of that information accurately. You don't calculate it, Marcus explained patiently. You feel it. You learn to read the wind by watching grass move, to judge distance by comparing shadows, to predict target behavior by studying movement patterns. It becomes instinct after enough time. The concept of instinctive long-range shooting was completely foreign to soldiers who relied on computer-guided weapon systems. Their technology removed human error from the equation, ensuring precise hits through mathematical calculation and automated targeting. Even if such a shot were possible, Thrax rumbled dismissively. What could one projectile accomplish against an entire hive cluster? You would need to eliminate hundreds of creatures to make any significant impact. Not hundreds, Marcus corrected. Just one. Captain Zoran's eyes brightened with sudden understanding. You believe there is a central command node. Despite the distributed hive mind, there must be a primary coordination point. Every complex system has critical nodes, Marcus agreed. Even distributed networks need central processing units. Biology follows the same patterns as technology. There's always one creature that's just a little different from the others, one that processes information just a little faster, coordinates responses just a little better. And you believe you can identify this creature from extreme range? Bex asked incredulously. I've done it before, Marcus said quietly. Different war, different enemy, same principle. You watch, you wait, you learn the patterns. Eventually, you see the one that's pulling the strings. The aliens struggled to comprehend the humans' approach to warfare. Their battles were fought with overwhelming force and advanced technology. The idea of patient observation followed by a single decisive action was completely outside their military experience. This strategy is based entirely on speculation, Crix objected. There is no guarantee that such a command creature exists, no certainty that it can be identified from long range, no assurance that eliminating it would have any significant effect on enemy operations. You're right, Marcus acknowledged. It's a gamble. But considering that conventional tactics have failed 17 times, maybe it's time to try something unconventional. Zoran studied the human soldier with renewed interest. The Etherians had learned to value different perspectives on complex problems, and Marcus was offering a completely unique approach to their tactical challenge. What would you need to attempt this strategy? Zoran asked. High ground with clear sight lines to the target area. Marcus replied without hesitation. Time to study enemy movement patterns. And one clear shot at the right target. The closest suitable elevation is Ridge 7. Zoran consulted his tactical displays. Approximately 3 kilometers from the primary hive cluster. Well beyond effective range for standard weapons. But not beyond range for mine, Marcus said confidently. 3 kilometers is challenging, but manageable under the right conditions. The other soldiers looked at him as though he had claimed the ability to fly unassisted through space. 3 kilometers was far beyond anything they considered possible for personal weapons. You seriously believe you can hit a specific target at 3,000 meters with that primitive weapon? Thrax's voice carried a mixture of disbelief and contempt. Without computer assistance? Without targeting algorithms? Without any technological support whatsoever? Marcus met the alien's gaze steadily. I've made longer shots. Impossible, Crix stated flatly. The projectile drop alone would be enormous at that distance. The atmosphere of variables would make accurate placement impossible. Maybe for you, Marcus replied calmly. But I'm human. We've been throwing rocks at things for hundreds of thousands of years. We're pretty good at hitting what we aim for. The transport shuddered slightly as they entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the viewports, they could see the scarred landscape below, marked by the evidence of failed battles. Somewhere down there, an enemy waited that had defeated every force sent against it. Very well, Zoran said finally. We will attempt this unconventional approach. However, we must also prepare standard assault protocols in case your strategy fails. Understood, Marcus replied, checking his rifle one more time. But it won't fail. How can you be so certain? Bex asked. Marcus looked up from his weapon, his dark eyes holding a confidence that seemed to come from some deep, unshakable source. Because I've never missed a shot that mattered. The landing was rougher than expected. Kepler 442b's atmosphere had been poisoned by void swarm bioweapons, creating unpredictable air currents that made the descent treacherous. The shuttle touched down on a plateau approximately 5 kilometers from the enemy hive cluster, hidden from direct observation by a series of rocky ridges. As the doors opened, the mixed unit of galactic soldiers stepped onto alien soil under a sky the color of dried blood. The air was breathable, but carried an acrid smell that made most of the aliens activate their atmospheric filters. Marcus simply adjusted a cloth mask over his nose and mouth, another piece of primitive equipment that drew skeptical looks from his companions. Atmospheric toxicity is at acceptable levels, reported Crix, reading from his environmental scanner. Though I recommend full filtration systems for extended exposure. How long do you need to set up your shot? Zoran asked Marcus as they surveyed the landscape ahead. Marcus was already studying the terrain through a pair of old-fashioned binoculars, another piece of equipment that seemed absurdly simple compared to the sophisticated scanning devices used by the other soldiers. He spent several minutes examining the ridge lines and elevation changes, occasionally checking wind direction by tossing small handfuls of dust into the air. I need to get to that ridge there. He pointed to a rocky outcrop approximately 2 kilometers away. From there, I should have clear sight lines to the hive cluster. But I'll need time to study their movement patterns before I take the shot. How much time? Thrax demanded impatiently. Every moment we delay gives the enemy opportunity to detect our presence and launch a counterattack. Could be hours, Marcus replied honestly. Could be days. I need to see enough of their behavior to identify the command creature. Rushing the shot would be worse than not taking it at all. The aliens exchanged uneasy glances. Their military doctrine emphasized swift, decisive action. The idea of waiting for an indefinite period while studying enemy behavior was completely foreign to their thinking. Days. Vex's skin shifted to an agitated orange color. We cannot maintain position for days without being detected. The Void Swarm has scouts throughout this region. Then, we'll have to make sure they don't find us, Marcus said simply, shouldering his rifle and checking his other equipment. In addition to his primary weapon, he carried a smaller sidearm, several days' worth of field rations, and what appeared to be a simple sleeping bag. Your equipment loadout is insufficient for extended field operations, Crix observed, comparing Marcus's gear to the advanced survival systems carried by the other soldiers. You lack atmosphere processors, emergency medical systems, long-range communication devices, and protective shelter. I've got everything I need, Marcus replied, beginning to move toward the selected ridge. Sometimes carrying too much equipment just slows you down. The journey to the observation position took 3 hours of careful movement across broken terrain. Marcus led the way, moving with a fluid economy of motion that impressed even the skeptical aliens. He seemed to flow around obstacles rather than fight through them, always choosing the path that offered the best concealment while requiring the least energy expenditure. The other soldiers, despite their advanced technology and physical enhancements, found themselves struggling to keep up with the humans' seemingly effortless progress. Their equipment, designed for maximum capability, proved cumbersome in the rough terrain. Their enhanced senses, calibrated for detecting obvious threats, missed the subtle signs that Marcus read instinctively. How does he move so quietly? Vex whispered to Thrax as they watched Marcus navigate a particularly difficult section of rocky ground without making a sound. Primitive evolution, Thrax replied dismissively, though there was a note of grudging respect in his voice. Humans developed as persistence hunters. They learned to move efficiently across difficult terrain while tracking prey. But this level of skill suggests extensive training and experience, Crix observed. This is not simply biological adaptation. They reached the observation ridge as the planet's primary star began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. From their elevated position, they could see the Void Swarm hive cluster in the distance, a collection of organic-looking structures that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Marcus immediately began setting up his position, carefully arranging his equipment and studying the target area through his rifle scope. The other soldiers established a defensive perimeter, their advanced sensors scanning for approaching threats. Contact, Lieutenant Vex announced quietly. multiple movement signatures approaching from the northwest. Approximately 15 Void Swarm scouts. The alien soldiers immediately began preparing for combat, checking their weapons and coordinating defensive positions. Marcus glanced up briefly from his scope, then returned to his observations. "Should we engage?" Thrax asked, his claws extending in anticipation of battle. "Negative," Zoran replied after studying his tactical display. "We maintain concealment unless directly threatened." "Marcus, can you continue your observations during potential combat?" "Combat will disrupt everything," Marcus replied calmly, still peering through his scope. "But the scouts might give me useful information about command structure." The Void Swarm scouts moved across the landscape below with unsettling coordination. Each creature stood roughly 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs that ended in razor-sharp claws. Their movements were fluid and predatory, but what made them truly frightening was their perfect synchronization. They moved as one organism, turning their heads in unison, changing direction simultaneously, reacting to stimuli with identical responses. "They're beautiful in a terrifying way," Marcus murmured, tracking their movement through his scope. "Look at that coordination. Every step perfectly timed, every movement optimized for efficiency. Beautiful." Crix's antennae twitched in disbelief. "They're weapons of biological destruction." "So am I," Marcus replied without taking his eye from the scope. "Doesn't mean I can't appreciate good craftsmanship." The scouts passed within 500 meters of their position, close enough for the aliens to see details of their biomechanical construction. Each creature appeared to be a fusion of organic tissue and technological enhancement, with visible circuitry running beneath translucent skin. Their eyes glowed with an inner light that suggested sophisticated optical systems. "Notice anything interesting about their movement pattern?" Marcus asked quietly. The aliens observed the scouts more carefully, trying to see what the human had noticed. "They maintain perfect formation," Thrax observed. "No deviation from optimal spacing." "They move in response to unheard signals," Vex added, suggesting instantaneous communication across the group. "Look more carefully," Marcus suggested. "Watch the third one from the left." The soldiers focused their attention on the specified creature. At first, it appeared identical to the others, moving with the same fluid coordination. But gradually, subtle differences became apparent. "It moves fractionally ahead of the others," Crix realized. "The timing is almost imperceptible, but it initiates movement patterns that the others follow." "Pack leader behavior," Marcus confirmed. "Even in a hive mind structure, there are usually individuals with enhanced processing capabilities. They serve as local command nodes, coordinating smaller groups within a larger network." "But this is only a scout patrol," Zoran pointed out. "Surely the primary command node would be located within the main hive cluster." "Probably," Marcus agreed. "But if this pattern holds true for small groups, it should be even more pronounced in the main concentration. There will be one creature that's just a little different from the others. One that processes information just a little faster, coordinates just a little better." The scouts moved past their position and disappeared into the distance, leaving the ridge quiet again. Marcus returned to studying the main hive cluster, while the other soldiers maintained their defensive positions. Hours passed. The planet's stars set completely, plunging the landscape into an alien twilight lit by 2 small moons. The Void Swarm cluster remained active, with creatures moving in and out of the organic structures in patterns that seemed random, but probably weren't. "I'm seeing approximately 300 individual creatures," Marcus reported. "Most are workers or basic warriors, but there are maybe 24 that show enhanced coordination behaviors. Those are probably the local command nodes I mentioned." "Can you identify a primary target?" Zoran asked. "Not yet," Marcus replied patiently. "I need to see more of their behavior patterns. Need to understand how they respond to different stimuli, how they coordinate complex activities." "We have been in position for 6 hours," Thrax growled impatiently. "How much longer do you require for this observation?" "As long as it takes," Marcus replied calmly. "You can't rush this kind of shot. When I pull that trigger, I need to be absolutely certain I'm hitting the right target." The aliens settled in for a long wait, their advanced equipment allowing them to remain alert and comfortable despite the hostile environment. Marcus, with his simpler gear, seemed equally at ease, his attention completely focused on the distant enemy cluster. As the night progressed, the void swarm activity began to change. The random movements gave way to more organized patterns, suggesting some kind of significant activity was beginning. "Something's happening," Marcus announced quietly. "They're organizing for something big." Through his scope, he watched as the creatures began forming into distinct groups, each group moving with purpose toward different objectives. Some headed toward the southern ridges, others moved to establish what appeared to be defensive positions. And in the center of all this activity, barely visible even through his high-powered scope, Marcus saw something that made him smile grimly. "There you are," he whispered. As dawn broke over Kepler 442b, the true scope of void swarm activity became apparent. The hive cluster was mobilizing for what appeared to be a major offensive operation. Hundreds of creatures moved with purpose across the landscape, their coordination so perfect it resembled a single organism preparing for action. Marcus had been watching through his scope for over 12 hours, mapping movement patterns and identifying the hierarchy within the apparently uniform swarm. His alien companions had taken turns maintaining watch, but the human sniper remained motionless at his position, his attention never wavering from the target area. "I count at least 400 individual units now," reported Crix, using his advanced scanning equipment. "They appear to be preparing for a large-scale assault on something. Probably the refugee settlements in the southern valleys," Zoran observed grimly. Intelligence reports indicated civilian populations were evacuated to that region. "Then, we're running out of time," Thrax rumbled, his claws scraping nervously against his armor. "If they launch their attack before we act, thousands of innocents will die." Marcus continued to peer through his scope, seemingly oblivious to the urgency building around him. His breathing remained steady and controlled, his position unchanged from hours earlier. The other soldiers watched him with growing frustration, unable to understand how he could remain so calm with disaster approaching. "Marcus," Zoran said quietly, "can you identify your target?" "Yes," Marcus replied without moving. "I've been watching her for the past 3 hours. Her." Vex's skin shifted to a puzzled yellow color. "You can determine gender at this distance?" "Body language," Marcus explained patiently. "Movement patterns, the way she positions herself relative to others. It's subtle, but once you know what to look for, it becomes obvious." Through his scope, Marcus observed a creature that appeared nearly identical to all the others, but moved with fractionally different timing. Where the other creatures waited for coordination signals, this one initiated them. Where others responded to stimuli, this one anticipated them. She was larger than the worker drones, but smaller than the obvious warrior variants, positioned always at the center of major decision points. "She's the hub," Marcus continued. "Everything flows through her. When the workers need new instructions, they orient toward her position. When the warriors coordinate complex maneuvers, they reference her movements. She's not giving orders exactly, but she's processing information and distributing it through the hive mind network." "Range?" Zoran asked. Marcus made subtle adjustments to his scope, compensating for distance, wind speed, and atmospheric conditions. 2,840 meters. Wind is steady at 15 kilometers per hour from the northwest. Atmospheric pressure is slightly higher than Earth standard, which will affect projectile flight characteristics. "You can calculate all of that without computer assistance?" Crix asked incredulously. "I told you, you don't calculate it," Marcus replied. "You feel it. You internalize all the variables until it becomes instinct." The alien soldiers struggled to comprehend this concept. Their weapons systems performed thousands of calculations per second, adjusting for every conceivable variable with mathematical precision. The idea that biological intuition could achieve similar results seemed impossible. "What is your confidence level for this shot?" Zoran inquired. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, running through mental calculations that had become automatic after years of training. Distance, wind, target movement, weapon characteristics, ammunition performance, all processed through experience rather than computation. "High," he said finally. "Very high." "Define very high in numerical terms," Thrax demanded. "I'll hit what I'm aiming for," Marcus replied simply. "That is not a mathematical assessment," Crix protested. "How can you make tactical decisions without precise probability calculations?" Marcus finally looked up from his scope, meeting the alien's compound eyes with steady confidence. "Sometimes the numbers don't matter," he said. "Sometimes it comes down to one person, one weapon, one moment. Either you can make the shot, or you can't. Either you trust your training, or you don't. Either you believe in what you're doing, or you don't. And you believe you can eliminate the command creature from this distance with one projectile?" Vex asked, his skin cycling through colors that indicated extreme skepticism. "I know I can," Marcus replied with absolute certainty. The conviction in his voice was so complete, so unshakable, that even the skeptical aliens found themselves believing him. There was something in the human's manner that suggested this was not bravado or false confidence, but the quiet certainty of someone who had faced impossible odds before and prevailed. "The window is closing," Zorn observed, watching the void swarm formations through his own equipment. "They will begin their assault within the hour." Marcus returned to his scope, making final adjustments and checking his calculations one last time. The target creature continued her coordination activities, unaware that death was being aimed at her from nearly 3 kilometers away. "Clear your minds," Marcus said quietly. "When I take the shot, it's going to change everything. The moment that bullet hits, every void swarm unit in the cluster will know where it came from. They'll coordinate an immediate response." "We are prepared for extraction under fire," Thrax assured him. "Our defensive capabilities are more than adequate for a fighting withdrawal." "No," Marcus shook his head. "You don't understand. When I take the shot, when I remove their primary command node, the entire network is going to destabilize. They won't just attack us. They'll panic. Panic." Crix's antennae twitched with confusion. "They are hive-minded creatures. They do not experience individual emotions." "They're still alive," Marcus replied. "And everything alive fears death. When their central coordination suddenly disappears, when they lose the ability to function as a unified organism, they'll revert to basic survival instincts. They'll either flee in complete disorder, or they'll attack everything in sight with desperate fury. Either outcome would serve our tactical objectives," Zoran pointed out. "Yes," Marcus agreed, "but you need to be ready for it. Because when I pull this trigger, the war changes. Everything that's happened up to now has just been the opening moves. What happens after this shot will determine whether your civilization survive or fall." The weight of that statement settled over the alien soldiers like a heavy blanket. They had come to this mission thinking in terms of conventional military objectives, not realizing they were participating in a turning point that would affect the fate of entire species. Marcus took a deep breath, settling himself into the perfect shooting position that had become second nature over years of training. His heartbeat slowed, his breathing became controlled and rhythmic. The rifle felt like an extension of his body, perfectly balanced and familiar. Through the scope, he could see his target clearly. The command creature stood at the center of a complex coordination activity, directing the final preparations for the assault on the civilian settlements. Her death would save thousands of lives and possibly turn the tide of the war. "On my mark," Marcus whispered. The alien soldiers held their breath, weapons ready for the chaos that would follow. In their advanced civilizations, wars were fought with overwhelming technological superiority and careful strategic planning. They were about to witness something much more primitive and infinitely more personal. Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger, years of training and experience condensed into a single moment of perfect focus. "Mark!" The rifle's report echoed across the broken landscape of Kepler. 442b, a sharp crack that seemed impossibly loud in the alien silence. The projectile, a precisely machined piece of metal weighing less than 30 grams, flew through the poisoned atmosphere at over 800 meters per second, following a ballistic arc that Marcus had calculated through pure instinct and decades of experience. For 2.3 seconds, the bullet traveled through space while time seemed suspended. The alien soldiers watched through their advanced optics, tracking the nearly invisible projectile as it crossed impossible distance toward a target they could barely see. Marcus never moved from his position. I still pressed to his scope, watching the results of his shot unfold in real time. Through the magnified view, he saw the command creature take one step forward in her coordination dance, then suddenly stumble. The bullet had found its mark with surgical precision, striking exactly where Marcus had aimed. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The command creature collapsed, her biomechanical systems failing as the projectile disrupted critical neural pathways. But the real destruction was not physical. As her coordination abilities died with her, the entire Void Swarm network began to unravel. Creatures that had moved with perfect synchronization suddenly found themselves isolated, cut off from the hive mind that had guided their every action. The carefully coordinated assault formation dissolved into chaos as hundreds of individual organisms reverted to basic survival programming. Impossible, breathed Crix, watching the destruction through his scanners. One projectile has disrupted their entire command structure. Not the projectile, Marcus replied quietly, finally lifting his head from the scope. The shot. There's a difference. The pandemonium below was unlike anything the alien soldiers had ever witnessed. Creatures that had functioned as a unified organism were now stumbling around in confusion, bumping into each other, unable to coordinate even basic movements. Some began attacking their own companions, their survival instincts overriding species recognition without central coordination to maintain order. They're turning on each other, Vex observed, his skin cycling through colors of amazement and horror. Predictable, Marcus said, beginning to pack his equipment with the same methodical precision he had shown throughout the mission. Remove central coordination from any complex system, and it collapses into its component parts. Biology is just another system. Within minutes, the organized Void Swarm force had completely disintegrated. Creatures fled in random directions, their terror overriding all other programming. The few that retained any combat effectiveness began fighting each other for resources and territory, their hive mind cooperation replaced by savage individualism. The assault on the civilian settlements has been completely disrupted, Zoran reported, monitoring communications from other military units. Refugee populations are secure. The immediate threat has been neutralized. More than neutralized, Thrax rumbled, his attitude toward the human markedly changed. The entire enemy force in this sector has been eliminated through internal conflict. This single action has achieved what 17 previous assault missions could not accomplish. Marcus stood up slowly, slinging his rifle across his back with casual ease. To the alien soldiers, he looked exactly the same as when they had first met him on the transport ship. Unremarkable physical presence, primitive equipment, no obvious enhancements or advantages. But they understood now that they had been looking at the wrong things. "Ow!" Sergeant Crix asked, his voice carrying genuine respect rather than skepticism. "How did you know that eliminating one creature would cause such complete system failure?" "Experience," Marcus replied simply. Every complex organization has critical failure points. Sometimes it's a communication hub, sometimes it's a supply depot, sometimes it's a single individual who holds everything together. You learn to identify those pressure points by studying how systems work. But the mathematical precision required for that shot, Vex protested. The distance, the atmospheric conditions, the target movement. How could biological intuition achieve what our computer systems could not calculate? Marcus considered the question seriously, recognizing that the aliens genuinely wanted to understand something that was fundamentally alien to their own experience. Your computers can process thousands of variables simultaneously, he acknowledged. But they process them separately, individually. Humans learn to integrate all those variables into a single gestalt understanding. We don't calculate wind speed and distance and target movement as separate factors. We feel the shot as a complete whole. Gestalt understanding, Zoran repeated thoughtfully. Your species processes complex information through intuitive synthesis rather than analytical calculation. Something like that, Marcus agreed. We've been hunters for millions of years. We learned to read patterns, to anticipate behavior, to make perfect shots when everything depended on success. The technology changes, but the fundamental skills remain the same. The implications of this revelation were staggering for the alien soldiers. Their civilizations had achieved technological superiority through computational thinking and systematic analysis. The idea that intuitive integration could achieve superior results challenged their basic assumptions about problem-solving. The other Void Swarm clusters, Thrax said suddenly. If this technique works consistently, we could eliminate their entire invasion force by targeting command nodes in each hive cluster. Maybe, Marcus replied cautiously. But they'll adapt. They always do. Once they understand what happened here, they'll restructure their command systems to eliminate single points of failure. Then, we have a limited window of opportunity, Zoran observed. How many more shots like this can you make? Marcus looked out across the chaotic landscape, where void swarm creatures continued their self-destructive rampage. His expression was calm, professional, showing none of the satisfaction that the aliens might have expected after such a spectacular success. As many as necessary, he said quietly. For as long as it takes. Over the following weeks, word of the impossible shot spread throughout the galactic military forces. The human sniper who had achieved what entire fleets could not accomplish became a legend among species that had never heard of Earth. Other human soldiers found themselves welcomed into elite units that had previously excluded them, their primitive weapons and unconventional tactics suddenly viewed with newfound respect. Marcus continued his work, moving from one void swarm cluster to another, identifying command creatures and eliminating them with surgical precision. Each shot was different, presenting unique challenges that required adaptation of technique and strategy. But each shot found its mark, disrupting enemy coordination and turning organized invasions into chaotic retreats. The tide of war had turned, not through overwhelming firepower or technological superiority, but through the ancient human art of making impossible shots when everything depended on success. The galaxy learned what humans had always known. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways, and sometimes one person with the right skills could change the course of history. Years later, when military historians analyzed the Void Swarm War, they would identify Marcus Chen's first shot on Kepler 442b as the turning point that saved galactic civilization. But Marcus himself never claimed credit for ending the war. He simply did what humans had always done when faced with impossible odds. He made the shot that mattered. The alien soldiers who had once mocked Earth's contribution to the galactic military learned to appreciate a different kind of precision. They discovered that technology was not always the answer to complex problems, and that sometimes the most effective weapon was not the most advanced one. They learned that humans brought something unique to the galaxy: the ability to succeed when success seemed impossible, to find solutions when conventional wisdom failed, and to make perfect shots when everything hung in the balance. And they learned never to underestimate the quiet human with the ancient weapon who claimed he had never missed a shot that mattered. Because when the moment came, when everything depended on one perfect shot, Marcus Chun proved that some skills transcended technology, some abilities could not be replicated by machines, and some shots could only be made by a human with enough experience to know that missing was not an option. The war continued for several more months, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Void Swarm, once seemingly invincible, found their coordination systematically dismantled by precise shots from impossible distances. Their invasion collapsed, not through attrition or overwhelming force, but through the surgical elimination of the neural networks that bound them together. And throughout the galaxy, a new respect emerged for the species that had seemed so primitive, so unremarkable, so lacking in obvious advantages. Humanity had proven that evolution was not just about developing advanced technology or enhanced physical capabilities. Sometimes it was about developing the ability to make one perfect shot when the fate of civilizations hung in the balance.